Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the second session. My name is Nompumelelo Pemi Isaac from Fundawande. It is my absolute pleasure to be the chair of this session, and the title of it is Improving Implementation in the Classroom. And as everyone who knows me knows, this is the area where I'm very passionate about. And I'm sure I share this with a lot of people in this room. We are really delving into the heart of the classroom, which is where the magic happens. And often with magic, there is mess and there's chaos, right? Okay, so what we will be discussing are strategies and approach that actually help our interventions be more than just brilliant ideas, but turn into action that improve teaching and learning in the classroom. I will be sharing key factors, both the challenges and the enablers that influence teacher behavior, classroom practice, and decision-making for the teachers. We will also deliberate on how to implement effective training and teacher support, how to track and measure this implementation, and how to help align the actors in the system to move towards the same goal, and that's improving learning outcomes. We have three amazing speakers lined up, and you'll understand why we chose these speakers. The first one is Carolina Beta. She's a leader in the field of global development and behavioral science. She's the managing director at Ideas 42 and heads up an impressive portfolio of initiatives that are changing lives across low and middle income countries, from social protection to education, workforce development, and even climate sustainability. She's been at the forefront of designing and scaling innovative programs that have real impact. With over 12 years of experience working with underrepresented communities globally, her expertise lie in harnessing the power of behavioral science to improve livelihoods. She's also led multicultural consumer research in the US, helping major brands better understand and connect with diverse communities. Her passion for driving change and wealth of experience makes her a perfect fit for our conversation today. Please join me in welcoming Carolina Beta. Our second speaker is Akashi Kawol, who's an expert in evaluation and research. Akashi leads a team at Central Square Foundation in Delhi, where she's making a difference and shaping education outcomes. With over 15 years of experience, Akashi has not only led education, child protection, and equity verticals at a leading firm in India, but also contributed to major evaluations for global organizations like the NIH, NSF, NASA, and the US Department of Labor and State. Her independent research on advancing evaluation methods in the Global South sets her apart as a thought leader in the field. With her deep expertise and passion for creating meaningful impacts, we're in for some truly valuable insights. Please join me in welcoming Akash. And our final speaker is Julia Frazier, whose remarkable career in education spans nearly 30 years across both the US and international landscapes. She began as a dedicated teacher and teacher educator with a background in teaching English to speakers of other languages. Over the last 15 years, she's become a powerhouse in providing technical leadership for major educational initiatives. She played a key role in the USAID-funded Pakistan Reading Project and the Ghana Learning Project, both recognized as some of the most successful early grade reading projects at scale. Her expertise and commitment to improving literacy and learning outcomes globally make her an inspiring voice in today's session. Let's give a welcome to Julia Fraser. And we are in a 100-meter sprint, right? So what I will do is not interfere with the speakers. They will take the baton, one giving to the other, and then we'll wrap it up with the Q&A. Over to you, Carolina.
Thank you, Pemi. I got so excited I stood up as soon as you said my name. Hi, everyone. I'm just watching the clock. I'm like, you're taking away my time. I don't know. Do you guys want to stretch or something? Yeah. There we go. Thank you. And I changed that with the clicker. Okay, perfect. So today I'm going to talk to you about a project where we used applied behavioral science to improve teaching practices in an FLN program in Senegal. And I want to introduce my organization. I work at Ideas 42, and we're a nonprofit that uses applied behavioral science to find solutions to various social problems around the world. We tend to work in close relationship with implementing partners on the ground. Again, our expertise is in behavioral science, so we partner with local organizations. And for this project, we partnered with ARED. I'm here with Mamadou today, who will join me for the Q&A. And they focus on educational innovations to promote quality education in Senegal. And also shout out to the Gates Foundation, who made this partnership and project possible. So ARED developed the Nada-Wune program. This is an after-school program that aims to improve FLN outcomes for second and third graders in Senegal who are falling behind. It's based on a structured pedagogy for smaller level groups. And the way that it works is that the classes meet 3 times a week, and they're taught by tutors who are often public school teachers. There's about 20 learners that are grouped into 2 to 3 groups based on their level of reading and math. So again, not based on their age, but based on their level of understanding for both reading and math. And there's 1 relearning group per class and 1 to 2 autonomous groups per class. And I'll go into what that means in a little bit. But one thing to keep in mind is that these rotate throughout the week. So the relearning group that was the relearning group on Monday will become an autonomous group the next class, and one of the autonomous groups will become a relearning group. The reason why this happens is because tutors follow the tutor guide for the relearning group and spend more time during the lesson with the relearning group. And then the autonomous groups are expected to work more independently on their workbooks. And the idea is that tutors should rotate between the relearning and autonomous groups. So even though they're spending more time with the relearning group, they should still rotate and check whether autonomous groups have questions, whether they're on task, etc. Some background on why this program was created. At the end of primary school in Senegal, about 1/3 of learners were reaching the minimum proficiency in math and only 13% in reading. A lot of the classes were focused on teaching to the curriculum and rote memorization rather than checking for understanding. And then finally, classes are often large, so it's not uncommon to have 50 or 60 learners per class. And the learning needs of different levels of students is not a priority, with special attention or more attention focused on top performers. And so how does Ideas 42 come in to do this? We used our behavioral design approach, which I'll walk you guys in a second, so I'm not going to waste time going through it. Happy to talk about it after. But what we did was we ran interviews with tutors or teachers, as well as conducted in-person observations in the classroom. And what we found was that tutors were spending all, if not most of the time with autonomous groups, and we're only engaging with relearning groups, and we're only engaging with autonomous groups at the very end of the class if they were engaging with them at all. And they were assuming that if learners in the autonomous groups were quiet, that meant that they were necessarily on task, which was not actually the case. And so our objective became to help tutors increase the amount and quality of support provided to autonomous groups during the Nada-Wune classes. Why is this important? I think this is a good question to ask. It's worth noting that learners spend at least half of their time in autonomous groups because of this rotation that I talked about throughout the week, which equates to at least 3 hours out of the 6 hours of instruction per week. And learners are more likely to being off task or not engaged in learning when they don't receive this support from tutors. So if we really want to see the most impact coming out of this after school program, then we want to make sure that learners in the autonomous groups are engaged and tutors are engaging with them. So through these interviews and in-person observations, we identified 4 key behavioral barriers that were preventing tutors from engaging with the autonomous groups. The first one was that tutors were prioritizing the upskilling of relearning group to such an extent that the needs of the autonomous groups were overlooked. The second, as I mentioned before, was this assumption that if students were quiet, that meant that they were on task. In many cases, that wasn't the case. They were paying attention to what was being taught to the relearning group, or they were just not doing the exercises in their workbook. Tutors also didn't have an explicit or implicit rule of thumb of when to rotate and provide the support to autonomous groups. In many cases, there are no clocks in the classroom, so it was really hard to keep time in terms of how long they had spent with a relearning group, when to rotate, etc. And then finally, tutors face obstacles that impede their ability to provide support to autonomous groups. So things like not knowing what the best way to set up the classroom, for example, was one of the obstacles that emerged from these conversations. And so we designed a package of interventions to address these barriers. I'll go through these in detail. The first one is a heuristics checklist and reminder. So this was a short guide with a checklist helping tutors understand how to prepare before the classroom, what to do at the start of the lesson, what to do during the lesson. And this was placed at the beginning of their tutor guide, so something that they used for instruction. This also came with visual reminders within the lesson plan of when to rotate to autonomous groups. So as they were following their lesson plan, they would see this little rotation icon, and that would be kind of a reminder of, oh, I need to go and rotate to the next group. And then finally, we created this ideal classroom setup cheat sheet and provided guidance on what to do if they weren't able to move the desks in this particular order. We also created a tutor training and commitment. So an additional module in tutors training that they were already receiving that asked them to role model and role play what it was that we were asking them to do, so that they were very comfortable once they were actually in the classroom, because they had practiced with their peers and with their supervisors. And this came also with a commitment contract that helped tutors form strategies and kind of come up with ideas of how to achieve their goals. And then finally, we came up with a simple and catchy song that was paired with hand movements that tutors and learners did at the start of the class, identifying what their role was as a tutor, as a student, how are they gonna act in the class, what's expected of them, etc. And I wish I could do it, but I'm not. And so we ran a cluster randomized control trial to evaluate the impact. We randomized at the supervisor level to avoid spillover, and this lasted from January through the end of May of this year. We divided all tutors into treatment and control group. There were 200 tutors in total. We had to drop a few. But the control group essentially received the original training and materials, and then the treatment group received the behavioral interventions. Again, not a huge sample, so we didn't know what results we were gonna get. And we measured 3 key outcomes that I'll get to in a second. I do wanna focus on this, even though this wasn't one of the key outcomes, but it was one of the areas where we saw the most impact. And again, you saw how simple that sheet was, showing what the ideal classroom setup. Just from that, we saw that tutors in the treatment group were significantly more likely to set up the desks in the ideal classroom setup, which was pretty exciting to see and very simple. In terms of number of rotations to autonomous groups, what we found was tutors in the treatment group had about 0.5 more rotations on average to the autonomous group, so not huge in terms of effect sizes, but positive direction. And what's interesting here is when we look at the overall data, it's not significant. When we look at the math portion of the class, it is significant. When we look at time spent with autonomous groups, we found that tutors in the treatment group spent an additional 2 minutes, 47 seconds with autonomous groups, more than compared to the treatment. And again, not significant at the overall level, but significant for the math portion of the class. We have a hypothesis for why, but you can ask me in the Q&A for timing purposes. And then quality of rotations to autonomous groups. We saw that tutors in the treatment group had 0.5 more quality rotations to the autonomous groups. And in this case, we saw significance for the overall data, not significant when we looked at reading or math portions. And here's a definition of what a quality rotation was. So a tutor performing at least 3 of the behaviors listed here. And so that's how we got to what a quality rotation was. Key takeaways, results are promising. So overall, we see at least directionally that behavioral interventions improved tutors' amount and quality of support to autonomous groups. And again, really cool to see how these simple interventions had that sort of impact. And worth noting that the behavioral interventions were very low cost. So we calculated that it was about 4 cents per learner. So super, super low cost. And they were relatively simple to implement because they built on existing materials and touch points that the program already had, which I think was key. And so recommendations for implementing these types of methodologies with multiple groups of learners, just from learnings that we had, I think very important to frame groups as equal so that there's no prioritization to one group over the other. Importance of role playing and trainings with teachers so that they come into the classroom knowing what to do. It's not scary or confusing. Providing clear guidance on how to support each group, visuals for highlighting important information. If you were asking them to rotate, having rotation reminders in the right channels. Again, here we used the tutor guide, but we thought about, reminders on their cell phones or an alarm clock or something like that. Obviously, it's going to vary by context. And then finally, leveraging the middle tier to make sure that there's an incentive for tutors to actually take up any additional things that are being asked of them. My time is up, so feel free to scan these barcodes for other cool resources that we've developed related to this project. Thank you.
All right. So I realized when Dhir spoke earlier today that the first 5 slides I have been rendered useless because it's precisely this. India is a behemoth. We have, a lot of students, roughly about 265 million. We have 1.5 million schools. We have 9.5 million teachers. The size of the problem is quite large. I'm going to speak about CSF, which is the Central Square Foundation, where I'm supposed to be doing research and evaluation. And this is the spread of our interventions. We work across 14 states, 11 of which are foundational literacy and numeracy states, and 3 are beyond FLN, where we do work in FLN, but we also do work beyond FLN. And that's the spread of our work. We also have work in early childhood education, school governance, and ed tech. So lots of different things, lots of different states, and that's our spread across 14 states. What I'm going to be presenting to you today is a quasi-experimental study that we did roughly on implementation fidelity for Nipun Bharat, which is India's foundational literacy and numeracy program. So India has a national level FLN program. So doing an RCT or trying to figure out an RCT for FLN in India was impossible. So we decided that we'll do the next best thing, which is a diff and diff, a quasi-experimental study. And the difference here was that we would focus, the implementation fidelity to a greater extent in a few focus areas in some of our focus states. The two focus states chosen for this were Uttar Pradesh and Madhya Pradesh. They're both Hindi speaking. India has multiple different languages, so it's very important to understand that when we speak about foundational literacy, language is a key component there. So both states that we chose for this quasi-experimental study were Hindi-speaking states. This is Nipun Bharat, and in response to Nipun Bharat, MP launched something called Mission Ankur. Just to give you a scope of MP or Madhya Pradesh, it's 23 Black students, which is what, 2.3 million? Yeah, roughly. And so 80,000 schools. So that's the scope of the state itself. So in MP, Mission Ankur, which was a response to Nipun, basically had clear learning goals. It was aimed at energizing and equipping teachers for FLN tools, teaching structured PED, largely at a state level. And the implementation was very mission mode, like it was, you go into the blocks to the districts. So the governance units are state, district, block, and then, you have villages. So that's the governance structure of the state itself. And it was sort of supposed to be a flow down from the state downwards. It had a holistic approach of introducing academics and governance reform. So that was, Nipun. In MP, we worked with our partners, RTR, or Room to Read, in sort of refining some elements of the program. We had the teacher professional development state level training stopped up in MP in our areas of Sihor and Shajapur, which were the two districts that we were working on over here. Then there was the coaching and the mentoring, where there were regular co-observations with the government mentors and individual visits by our field staff. So that was one of the top-ups that we gave, Sihor and Shajapur, the two districts at MP. And then there were regular monitoring by field visits, by the field teams. So like it says over there, the districts were Sihor, Shajapur, and that means 9 blocks. So there's 5 blocks in Sihor and 4 in Shajapur. 9 blocks, roughly about 2,090 schools, 2,200 teachers, and 35,000 students. So that's the scope of these two districts. In UP, we had one district, which was Varanasi, and our partners there were LLF. The functioning style was a little different. Here we chose one block that would be a high-touch block, and the other blocks in this district would be low-touch blocks, which meant that the span ratio of the field person would be higher in the low-touch blocks versus in the high-touch blocks. So, for example, the ARP to teacher span ratio is roughly about 1:50, and ARP to school ratio is somewhere about 1:28. This is the specifics of the Sevapuri block, where there's 111 schools and 330 teachers. So basically, the intervention was greater fidelity and greater resource-focused, human resource-focused, monitoring-focused in Sevapuri block in Varanasi in UP. The remaining of the 8 blocks in Varanasi received the low-touch intervention. Again, here, the number of schools were 903, number of students were 73,000 odd, and 2,600 teachers is what we are looking at. The ARP to teacher ratio is 1:450. ARP to school ratio is 1:225. So you can see the span ratio varies quite a bit. How did we evaluate this? Well, we wanted our data to be trustworthy, so we did get an external evaluation, which is educational initiatives, or EI. Then there was our team at CSF itself, who was looking at this data very closely and sort of working with EI to make sure that we were doing everything the way that we said we would. And we had a research advisory board who oversaw all of our processes and our methodology and our findings. So what I'm going to be presenting in a little bit are the midline results. And that's very scary. Every evaluator will tell you it's the scariest to present midline because you don't know what the endline is going to say. And then you might have to come back up here and eat your words. So, but this is precisely, what our midline results are showing. There was 3 different areas of focus for us. Number 1 was to just check if we were having any impact at a student learning level. The second one was to figure out if, implementation fidelity was actually increasing or there was some improvement there, or some betterment there. And third was to sort of have some cross-state learnings, because UP and MP are very different states, they're very different contexts, and they've also had very different approaches to the FLN program itself, the nation's FLN program. So we were trying to figure out, is there something that we can learn from MP and their implementation of Nippon, and give it to UP, or take something from UP and give it to MP. So those were the three broad focus areas, what we were looking at when we were looking at this evaluation. This is the design. Not going to bore you much, but what we did is we have two cohorts. Cohort 1 was, 9 September. It was recruited in 2022, and it was basically grade 1 students and there's a control, and the non-demo is what we call the control, because the demo is what we call the demonstration site. Since it is a diff and def, we wanted to make sure that we were using the right kind of words for it. So the demonstration slide is the districts that we spoke about, Sihor and Shajapur for MP, and Sevapuri and the rest of Varanasi for UP. The non-demonstration is a comparison group that was sort of recruited using parallel trends and all sorts of making sure that there were equals in comparison at the baseline itself. In the midline, we also recruited a new grade 1 cohort, along with following the grade 2 cohort into their learning journeys. So as a result of which, we have the diff results for the cohort that was recruited in October 2022, and the midline results that we're presenting are from March 2024. So there's that. There's the cohort 1, which is being compared to, itself. And then there's cohort 2, which has been recruited so that we have 2 cohorts of comparison at the end line. So that's the structure of the evaluation. I don't mean to rush through this, but there are some fairly promising effect sizes on there. We have effect sizes ranging from 0.4, all the way to 0.66, which are fairly decent. And these are for MP, for Madhya Pradesh. So we're definitely seeing some positive movement in student learning. This is for literacy in MP. Similarly, in numeracy, the effect sizes are slightly smaller. And this is what we call our numeracy problem in CSF. But we do sort of tend to see some positive movement, particularly in subtraction, which is what we call a benchmark competency for the state, interestingly. This is for UP. Again, the effect sizes are fairly promising. We are seeing effect sizes up to 1.2. And for literacy in our high-touch model, and fairly promising in the low-touch model too. So it's not as if just the high-touch is bettering itself, but the low-touch is improving along with it. But the really good news in all of this is that the rest of the state, our control groups, also show tremendous improvement. So the reduction, this is cohort 2 results. I mean, there's nothing to see. We were just trying to establish baseline equivalency here. But the positive from the cohort 2 results was that when compared to cohort 1, at the baseline level, cohort 2 seemed to have improved too. So there was an improvement in how grade 1 students were performing in 2024 vis-a-vis 2022. So there might have been some systemic shifts there that we wanted to sort of explore. Along with this, and this was supposed to be the bulk of my presentation, but that didn't happen. So along with this, we had a very in-depth process evaluation that we did that I'm just going to have to sort of rush through, wherein we had at the midline, we recruited a sample of about 30 classroom observations, 15 in each state. And we sort of did a very in-depth process evaluation to understand what is working and what is not working. And we came up with this in MP, wherein we saw that in teacher mindset, students are learning faster in numeracy. Teachers seem to think that that's happening. There was an absence of, gender biased actions. Teachers were not acting in a gender biased way. There was a key barrier to program success was perceived inherent variation in child ability. Teachers thought that some kids were meant to learn and other kids weren't, that some kids were just going to learn no matter what. And, certain portions of the TG or the teacher guide were seen as optional. Workbooks were seen more as an administrative responsibility than something that would aid student learning. Similarly, we had program design barriers, which was the length of the lesson plan itself. There was a mismatch in the teacher guide and the workbook. There was a lack of guidance and remedial plans. Numeracy was scheduled for post-lunch, which came up as a huge problem for numeracy teaching itself. But the support and monitoring, the visits by the middle management, or the CSEs as they're called here, were frequent enough. There was a usefulness of the FLN conversational formats, or the groups that they created for FLN conversations amongst themselves. And there was a systemic tracking of student assessment data. This is just from MP. Some of the similar ones from UP were here. Again, it's very sort of similar in how we're seeing it pan out. There's a lack of demos by the ARPs, or the academic resource people. There was no analysis of the classroom observation or the teacher feedback data that went back into the system. And there was a huge pressure to achieve the Nipun goals, or the FLN goals of the state. And there was a late delivery of resources. So there was a whole bunch of barriers and to the success of the program that we were observing from the process evaluation itself. And there were a lot of the factors that were aiding the program success. And I swear, I'm just going to take about a minute and close this out. There were some key challenges and sort of findings from the process evaluation that I do want to leave with, which was that a huge part of the teacher, the structured pedagogy sort of lesson plan was the you do bit, where the child is supposed to do the activity themselves. It was conducted as a we do, where the teacher sort of helped with it. All tools were and workbooks, et cetera, were seen as being administrative rather than pedagogical. They weren't really sort of being seen as something that the teachers could use to better student learning. It was mostly, we've been told to do this, so we're going to do it. There was very limited use of feedback that came from the middle management. And even feedback itself was delivered in a more administrative fashion than one that could actually help build curricular and pedagogical knowledge in the classroom. Use of data, there's a lot of data being collected, but how is it being used? We don't know. I mean, it's not going back to the teachers. That's one key sort of focus there. Again, there's another thing that I did want to sort of leave with was the numeracy challenges. And I'm wrapping up. Numeracy has emerged as a bit of a challenge for both the states. There seems to be an issue there. Kids are doing well in literacy, but not in numeracy. And if you want to know more, you'll have to find me, because there were a few more slides, but clearly 12 minutes isn't enough. Thank you, everybody.
Hi, everybody. In the interest of time, I'm just going to get started before the slides come up. I am going to look how to work this thing. Okay, so I'm Julia Frazier. I'm going to talk about the Djibouti Early Grade Reading Activity. It's a USAID funded project. We refer to it as DEGRA. And it was a 5-year project, 5.5 years. It's ending on Monday. We're all sad. It was technical assistance to the Ministry of Education and Professional Training, we refer to as MENFOP. And it had the first objective, main objective, was to improve reading outcomes for children in grades 1 to 5, and had 3 sub-objectives of improving reading instruction, increasing community participation in reading at the school level and also at home, and reinforcing and maybe updating reading education policies. It was in every public school in the country. So it started out at scale and continued at scale. Of course, scale in Djibouti is different from scale in India. And so there's that to note, but we did just go in full on straight from the beginning. And we started in grade 1 in year 1 and added a grade level each year. And so the year 2, grade 2, so on. We had, it was led by FHI 360. We had a few partners in our consortium. School to School International supported the EGRA assessments, and they phased out by year 3, turning over everything for EGRA assessments to the evaluation service in MENFOP. There was the Center for Applied Linguistics, which specializes in teaching second language learners, French is the language of instruction in Djibouti, but almost no children speak French at home. So the expertise of Center for Applied Linguistics in the early years, setting up models of teaching and learning materials and teacher professional development was super helpful. And then we also had the overseas strategic communications to help with behavioral change communications. And we had 3 local partners, PLA, UN was a UNFD, and ADO. They worked with community participation in different geographic areas. So DEGRA came along at an incredibly lucky time, and we really tried to take advantage of that. The Ministry of Education had just rewritten their education strategy. They had a new strategy, and they were writing a new curriculum. Also, at the same time, the global proficiency framework had not yet been written. It was just getting started. And the Align toolkit by USAID also had not yet been developed. And so the DEGRA project team took a participatory technical assistance approach and worked with the different directorates of MEMFOP to create a shared vision of what the new reading curriculum could look like. In 2019, GPF did, and so that is in the first year of the project, they released a draft of the framework for pilot. And MEMFOP volunteered to be a pilot for this. They worked to align their grade 1 to 5 curriculum skills and map it against the GPF skills to understand where they were. They then worked that into the new teaching and learning materials and the associated teacher trainings. And so we ended up being able to work across everything that really would affect the reading outcomes across the ministry all at once. It was a very, very lucky time and very exciting time to be involved in education in Djibouti. So when we implemented, we continued that collaboration, the same collaboration that we took to align the different parts of the system. We had integrated working groups with representatives from CFEF in charge of continuing professional development, the Inspector General's office, CREPEN in charge of teaching and learning materials, and the Evaluation and ICT Service, which is in charge of assessments and data. Each of the working groups had focal points who reported to the Secretary General. At the same time, there was a steering committee that was made by the directors of these different sectors, the integrated working group leaders, CFEF, Inspector General, CREPEN, Evaluation and ICT, formed the steering committee. And DEGRA worked with all of these different groups. This allowed us to work in a coherent way, keeping the system aligned as we moved into implementation in each grade level. And we developed also a pool of trainers. They ended up being called the pool of the pedagogical advisors who did teacher training and then also follow-up observation and coaching of teachers and data collection. The inspectors did as well, but the pedagogical advisors were more hands-on. They had a smaller advisor to school ratio. And the data they collected formed the dashboards that we used at the national and middle tier level to make decisions about resource allocation, identify problems as they were arising rather than letting them go, and change direction when we needed to change direction. So this system really worked nicely for us. That will work. There we go. So this bore fruit. You can see grade 2 is the grade that we tested every year from the time they were in grade 2. So our baseline, the first year, you can see the red score at the bottom. That was the end of year score at the baseline. And then we tested the beginning and end of each school year because as my colleague was just saying, if you're in every school, it's very difficult to figure out, how you're doing and what's maybe going differently from other schools. So we were able to look every single year, and this is where we got to see something exciting. From the second year to the third year of the project, we get a really nice jump. So now we have kids starting grade 2 further along in some cases, or close to where they ended grade 2 before the project. So something different is happening in grade 1, and then we're seeing it in grade 2. We saw a little slide in the last year. We really hope that that's just a blip. It's not going to slide back, but this is it. This is this year's data. The project is ending. So it's one of the questions we have. At the same time, teachers using effective practices improved from 37% to 53%. And we wonder what it would be like if we could get that higher up and ideally to 100%. The same time, the grade 5 results are less stellar, but we think about this year was the first year we worked with grade 5 teachers. The grade 5 students were also the students that we saw in 2020 and 2021 on the grade 2 graph. These poor grade 5 students had to break in a new teacher using the DEGRA program for the first time every single year. So we do wonder what would happen if we could stick with these and see if we'd see another bump at the third year. There's a rule of thumb in teacher development that it takes 3 years for a teacher to appropriate a new methodology. And the data from grade 2 really seem to validate that rule of thumb. 3 years and we see a difference. So my takeaways from DEGRA are projects need coherence. The fact that the whole system was working together, they shared a vision, every piece of the system was designed to support improved reading outcomes. The curriculum, the materials designed from it, the assessments assessing it, the teacher pre-service and in-service development, all focusing on the same skills, the same concept of what a successful first grade reader is, what a successful second grade reader is, made a huge difference. And the follow-up also stayed across the system. There wasn't the usual competition for resources. It was a collaboration to use this resource together. Persistence is also really crucial. Just going in and doing it quickly and leaving is not going to show the results. We see grade 5 didn't do much. It's disappointing. We need to continue to support the teachers. We need to continue the support across the system. And then finally, patience. We can't expect things to change overnight. We see the data, it's not going to change overnight. We have to allow stakeholders to appropriate new ideas. We need to be flexible, and I would argue that the patience and persistence continue in a loop, and it's moderated by flexibility. So we persist, but maybe the data is showing us that teachers are doing something unexpected in the classroom, or the teaching material is maybe not quite at the right level for the students. Maybe we need to go back. We need to be patient, watch what's happening, go back again and check. But by having coherence of vision, coherence of a program, not pulling a system or the teachers in different directions, sticking with it and waiting to see those results happen, standing hand in hand with the implementers, that's going to yield success. So thank you.
So we are joined by Mamadou from Senegal, working with ARED, and they together with Ideas 24. He's French speaking, so there'll be an interpreter who's will be talking to him. So if the people asking the questions could speak slowly, I will try also. Okay, so we're ready to take questions from the floor.
Hi. Hi. Thanks. My name's Caroline Grant from the British Council. My question's for Julia. Hi, Julia. Good to see you. Julia, really, I think your presentation about coherence and really kind of, working with the system as a whole was really brilliant. But I just wanted to find out from you, how did you manage to embed your reading, your program in the pre-service and in-service curriculum?
Should I answer now or?
Can we take a second question?
Hi, my name is Shraddha and I'm from the British Asian Trust, and my question is for Julia as well. Given that you were working with the government, how did you sort of ensure that some of these measures were actually, adopted and sustained within the system now that you're actually coming to the end of the program? Was that something that you were thinking about right from the beginning, or,
Can we take the last question for any of our other speakers?
Hi, Nalam. I'm from Teach for All, and my question is for, I suppose, Mamadou, my old friend. We know that classroom is where the mechanism of change is for a lot of this stuff, and how important it is to get teachers to do more by doing less, essentially. And I was quite interested in the two different groups, but from a program design perspective, what was the difference here? What was almost the nudge or the behavior science input that changed from a program design perspective that enabled teachers to do more or to implement more from a program perspective?
Sure. Can you hear me? Does this work? Yeah. So first to Caroline's question, it's nice to see you. The pre-service was a request, actually. It wasn't in the original project design from USAID, but the group CFEF that's in charge of teacher training asked us to work with them to update the pre-service curriculum so that it would be coherent. So it was really, we were thrilled, and USAID was also, and agreed to let us expand our scope into supporting the pre-service curriculum to make sure it all held the coherence. For in-service curriculum, that's where I think those working groups were really important. In everything we did, we had representatives from teacher training and from teaching and learning materials, and from the inspector general, and from evaluation and ICT. So that meant in the materials writing teams, there were teacher trainers helping to write the materials. They understood the methodology and what was going into the lesson plans because they were the ones helping to write those lesson plans. So I think that was a really important aspect, because sometimes they're so detached, and then also things can become territorial, or people are kind of mad, well, why wasn't I involved? And I don't agree with this. So therefore, I'm not really all in to make it happen in the classroom. I think having this coherent approach across the whole MEMFOP really made a difference. For the how it was embedded in the government, it was in the project design from the get-go. So as I said, the school to school phased out. They finished in year 3. In the first year of the project, they worked next to the evaluation service to plan and implement the first EGRA. And then each year, they did less of the work, stepped back and put the evaluation service in front. So the last 2 years of the project, evaluation service did the EGRA completely themselves. FHI 360 would help them if they had questions about data analysis. Our data analysts were there to help. If they were struggling with the report writing, we were there to also help with the reports. but this was their work. Same thing for the data dashboards. Everything that we did, we were phasing ourselves out. So by the last 2 years, we made almost no technical visits to Djibouti. We had a skeleton staff. I mean, truly, we had 2 people for the teacher, professional development, and teaching and learning materials together, 2 people on our staff. It was all done by the MEMFOP teams. We had 1 person for policy. We had 1 M&E person and 1 assistant to him. So we had 1 community participation person. This was really technical assistance. We worked through MEMFOP structures. And so we do hope that is truly embedded. The last year we did have, I'll just a little shout out, say encouraging collaboration among implementers. We had a glitch. We had fewer classroom visits in the last year because World Bank came in with a Teach Coach project and started to pull the attention of some of the pedagogical advisors. We had a perfect opportunity to create synergy and reinforce, carry stronger forward what we were doing. And instead we got a little derailed. So just a plug for coherence, not just among the government itself, but among us.
Merci. Bonjour à tous.
Hello, everyone.
OK. Par rapport à l'approche que nous avons introduite au Sénégal, les enseignants au Sénégal ont l'habitude d'enseigner la classe tous en même temps et d'une seule façon.
So I'm not a professional interpreter, so I'm really sorry.
Penelope can help.
That's fine, but I will try to translate my best.
Okay.
Overall in Senegal, I think the habit is to teach everything in the same class.
Et on voulait avoir un enseignant qui peut gérer 3 groupes. Vous avez un groupe de lettres, un groupe de mots, un groupe de syllabes, et tous les 3 groupes, vous les enseignez en même temps.
So they wanted a teacher who could teach 3 different groups, which is literature, letters,
Lettres, syllabes
syllable,
et mots.
and words.
Mais l'enseignant, quand il se met avec le groupe lettres, il oublie les autres.
When the teacher starts teaching letters, he forgets the other groups.
Et on veut voir comment on peut l'aider à enseigner ce groupe-là, mais tout en n'oubliant pas les autres groupes parce qu'il doit les aider.
So they want to help the teacher to be able to teach one group without forgetting the other groups.
Et c'est ce qu'ils nous ont aidés à faire, à dire attention, pourquoi il oublie? Peut-être d'abord, tous les élèves ne sont pas engagés avec lui pour faire le travail.
So they wanted to help the teacher and just raise attention that maybe not all the students have the attention and are engaged.
Sur les outils qu'ils utilisent, il peut y avoir des éléments qu'on peut mettre qui peuvent le rappeler qu'il y a encore un travail à faire avec les autres groupes.
So with the tools that they use, they can set up some sort of reminders to help the other groups.
Et même la façon dont ils disposent les 3 groupes, ça peut jouer aussi un rôle pour qu'ils puissent voir les groupes et ne pas les oublier.
And there's the way as well of organizing the groups so he can visually see the difference.
On a identifié ces différents éléments et on a formé les enseignants à pouvoir les appliquer.
So they have identified these and now they're trained to be able to identify all the differences.
Mais il y a un grand conflit d'intérêts au Sénégal, en tout cas chez nous, entre les chercheurs et les enseignants.
So there's a big conflict of interest in Senegal between researchers and teachers.
Les chercheurs, ce qu'ils veulent est que ces élèves n'apprennent pas, ces élèves apprennent et ils veulent voir l'écart.
Pouvez-vous répéter, s'il vous plaît?
Les chercheurs, ce qu'ils cherchent, ce qu'ils veulent savoir, comment ils peuvent trouver un grand écart entre ces élèves qui n'apprennent pas et ces élèves qui apprennent bien parce que la méthode est bien appliquée.
So the searcher wants to see what's the gap between the students that can learn and the students that can't learn and why.
Les enseignants, eux, ce qui les intéresse, est-ce qu'à la fin de l'année, on dit que leurs élèves ont réussi?
And the teacher wants to know at the end of the year, have the students achieved?
Vous mettez un groupe de traitement, un groupe de témoins. Avec les nouvelles technologies, les informations passent. Les élèves, les enseignants qui ne sont pas formés, ils vont aller chercher l'information parce que les autres réussissent.
So with all the new technology, information is being passed very quickly, so the teachers can find missing
Comparez les deux
information.
groupes, vous ne verrez pas un grand écart.
So if you compare both groups, you won't see too much of a
Et
gap.
le ministère de l'Éducation nationale, ils savent qu'il y a un grand écart parce qu'ils ont vu que les gens utilisent leur propre argent pour aller apprendre des autres.
But the Ministry of Education can see that gap because they can see that people use their own money
C'est
to
pourquoi nous vous
learn.
félicitons pour le travail que vous avez fait et je vous assure que il y a beaucoup d'effets que les gens, qui ont été apportés par rapport à ce que nous avons fait.
So thank you so much for the work you have done. It has had huge effects.
More questions? Anyone with a question for Akashi?
I'm Viji from JPAL. Your slide towards the end showed the factors that aid the programs, that help the program, and there were barriers. And the set of barriers looked beyond the program. There were systemic ones like resources reaching late, teachers having mindsets where all of the extra administrative work. So just curious to know, how are you looking at that in terms of your own program success and also making sure that systemically it changes?
Right. So a couple of slides that I did miss were about the program focused feedback too. But I want to start by stating it this way. Nippon is not limited in its oversight over FLN education in India, right? Like, because that is the national program. So everything is essentially within the purview of Nippon. And what we're trying to do is implement Nippon with greater fidelity. So therefore, systemic barriers are equally important for us to know about. Teacher mindset is equally important for us to know about as anything else, as their pedagogical practices in the classroom. A couple of slides later, what you would have seen is that the practices also themselves haven't changed very much. So there hasn't been that much of a positive shift in, say, I do, we do, you do, or oral vocabulary tasks, or any sort of, any of the teacher guide mandated practices also. We've done this this red, yellow, green mapping of them, of the practice shift, and that hasn't happened either. So when we saw the effect sizes and why we sort of are very sort of stunned by them is because we're not really seeing as much of a difference in the classroom. But being researchers, what we did was we beat the data till it was dead. And we started looking at it block-wise, and we were like, okay, let's look at it district-wise, cluster-wise, whatever. And when we started looking at data block-wise in Madhya Pradesh, in one of the states, we saw that there were slight positive shifts at the block level in teacher practices. Very slight, nothing statistically significant, nothing we can write home about, but a hypothesis to test for the next round of our N-line. So that's where we were, but it really took a lot of probing, because right at the, looking at it just up front, we couldn't really see any shifts. And in fact, SLO, also, there was no correlation in the classrooms, that the schools that were doing better on SLOs and the teacher practices in those classrooms. So there was really no connection per se. But we are hopeful that our N-line process evaluation and the monitoring tools that we're putting into practice now, continually, are going to give us more data that helps us understand what exactly is happening that is causing these shifts.
3 more questions? We still have time. Let's see. Okay, Kizzy, then we'll come to you, and then we'll finish with you. Don't turn around.
This is a question to anyone of the panel who wants to answer. So could you say a bit about the extent of sort of a shared, to the extent to which you have within your organizations, a shared understanding of what good practice looks like in the classroom, and how you build that shared understanding, whether it's within the organization, among teachers in schools, and within a system?
So my question is for Akashi. How did you sort of plan your evaluation in a way that you could actually solve for any sort of contamination in your treatment and control? Because I think that's a very real challenge that most of us face. So would love to hear your thoughts on that.
My question's also for Akashi. You said something really interesting about teachers' gendered attitudes, and I'm very happy to hear you talk about gender and inclusion. Can you maybe expand on that a bit? Did you see any, there are a lot of numbers on the slides. Was there gender disaggregated differences in student learning outcomes, et cetera? And then I'm going to be a little cheeky. And Carolina, can you expand on why you think math was, yeah.
I'm glad my experiment worked on you guys. So our hypothesis is that there is less material to cover in the math portion of the class compared to reading, which meant that it was easier for tutors to be able to rotate among groups. But it's just a hypothesis, we didn't test it. We also thought typically in math, there's less autonomous groups compared to the reading portion, but we tested that and actually that was not the reason why they were rotating.
La question? C'est par rapport à la pratique, c'est-à-dire, je voudrais mieux comprendre la question.
About the good practice question, could you repeat it and maybe develop it?
Thanks, Mamadou. So I suppose my question is about what you want to see in a good quality classroom. So what you expect of your teachers when they're delivering a good quality literacy or numeracy lesson, what that looks like.
D'accord, merci beaucoup. Il y a beaucoup de choses que nous voulons voir qui se passent très bien dans la classe. Mais le plus important est que est-ce que chaque enfant est en train d'apprendre?
So there are lots of good things, but what we want to know is each student eager to learn?
Parce que nous avons l'habitude de voir des élèves dans une classe qui sont presque absents de la classe. C'est comme s'ils ne sont pas dans la classe.
Because we're used to see students that are just here, but actually not really here.
Et donc, le fait déjà de voir tous les élèves engagés dans l'apprentissage est déjà un élément très important pour nous dans la classe.
So seeing all the students engaged is one important factor.
Un autre élément important pour nous est que nous mettons beaucoup d'efforts pour avoir des outils que les enfants peuvent utiliser.
Another element is to put in place tools that kids can use.
Et nous aimons aussi voir est-ce que vraiment ces outils sont utilisés par les enseignants pour aider les élèves à bien apprendre.
And they want to see whether these tools are actually used by the teachers to help the kids learn.
C'est des éléments très importants et il y en a beaucoup d'autres. Mais vraiment, c'est plutôt est-ce que l'enfant vraiment est en train d'apprendre? S'il est en train d'apprendre, que ce soit la lecture, que ce soit les mathématiques, parce qu'il est là pour apprendre, c'est ça déjà l'élément fondamental. Et c'est pour ça que nous formons l'enseignant pour l'aider à le faire.
So there are many more elements, obviously, but just seeing the kid engaged is the most important one. And that's how they want to teach the teachers to be able to engage and see the kids engaged.
I'll take a stab at that as well. At FHI 360 and Global Education, we do have some documents we've put together internally to just make sure that we all do share the same vision of what good teaching and learning looks like for reading, for math. And we also inform that with resources put out, for example, by USAID, like the Reading Matters framework, and some of the best buys, that document, plenty of documents that we go to inform that, and we revisit and we revise. And then as we onboard new staff, we very intentionally use that with them. At the startup of the DEGRA project, then we had staff on the ground that was just fabulous and really just picked this up and ran with it, and had a bigger challenge trying to change the thinking of some of the ministry officials, especially in the teaching and learning materials department and also the teacher training, about what teaching reading looks like and the importance of kids being able to decode words and not going with a whole word approach. But we had a really strong technical team backing up our team on the ground, and over time we've all arrived at that shared vision. But it does take intentional work. We very intentionally work on it at the headquarters level and update it on a regular basis.
Sorry. Whoever had a question for Akash, you can find her after the session during coffee and she will answer that. And I think the two things that really stood out for me was the one where we were talking about, you guys were talking about tutors and actually allowing them to set up goals and those goals to help them strategize about how to solve their problems. And I'm like, this is interesting because I don't know how much of this we actually do with the teachers, where teachers are actually part of strategizing to figure out with goals. How do we then reach these goals? And I'm really interested in finding out who's doing that type of work and what success that has yielded. Thank you very much for your participation.